Margaux, Carolyn, how you doing? Are you there?
We are here.
Great. Would you like to take over?
Yes.
Certainly. Let's start with introductions. Margaux, do you want to give a little bit of an introduction for yourself, and then I'll go?
Absolutely. Sorry, I'm just going to zoom out of my way. So my name is Margaux. I'm French. I currently live in Sweden. I'm head of customer experience for a company in Sweden called 55 Degrees. We have different products on Atlassian Marketplace, Azure Marketplaces, as standalone that are all there to help team be more agile. But that's my main job. But what I do most, I'm also a pro Kanban trainer. So I love doing Kanban stuff, training, coaching, all of that. So that's why I'm here today.
Awesome. Thanks. I'm Carolyn McNicoll. I'm in De Pere, Wisconsin, and I'm a flow metrics enthusiast. I love helping teams figure out how to become predictable and learn how to be more efficient in their work. I love the Actionable Agile tool. Some consultants, friends of mine, some of you might know Jeff and Chad from Wisconsin Agility, introduced me to Actionable Agile about 3 years ago, and it's my favorite metrics tool I've used in all of my years in IT, even before Agile. We are partners with 55 Degrees from Centify, so we work to help expand the community and the users and the understanding of how they can benefit from flow metrics. So that's why we're here today. Mark, are you ready for us to proceed? Okay, cool. Could you put out, I have a poll. We just want to ask a quick question, and then we'll jump into the presentation. So if you guys could do a quick selection on the poll, we'll see what you guys are doing currently for estimating your work. Looks like we've got about 48 responses and 70 some people here, so we'll give you another few seconds to finish. Overall, the winner is story points. I'm super curious what other might be, but we can talk about that at the end. So thank you for that. That's you're pretty typical from most places I've talked to. It's story points, but I'm glad to see people are using flow metrics data as well. And not estimating is interesting too. That might scare some people, but I understand that. All right, so we can move on from the poll into the next slide as soon as that's done. Okay, do I have to remove it from my screen? Looks like I do. Okay. So story points. This is just an explanation or an evidence that there are different definitions of story points depending on who you talk to. Basically the same intent, just worded a little bit differently. So I think everybody understands that, especially those who are already using story points. So let's jump into poll number 2. Another quick question, just so we want to target our information to you as best we can for what you need to know or want to know. So if you're estimating your work in any way, what percentage of the time does that estimate seem to be on track? So far, 40 to 70% is the leader. That's higher than I expected, but we'll talk about that at the end. On track could mean 2 different things. It could be you feel the story points didn't change for the work that you did, but did that story point estimate help you predict when it would be done? So that's what we'll get more into in this presentation today. Okay, Mark, do you want to move to the last poll? I'm sure some of you have heard from leaders or product owners, when will this work be done? So we would love to know how you answer that. And just so you know, I have answered it in all the top 4 ways, the first 4 ways at a time or two in my career.
Mm.
Awesome to see that there's a good amount using flow metrics. All right, thanks for that feedback, everybody. Margaux, if you want to move on to the next slide. Okay, well, how can estimates or why can estimates be misleading? The first one is complexity. If you are working on something that you're unfamiliar with, it's going to be more complex to you than maybe somebody who's an expert. And that applies to a lot of things in life. If you told me I needed to change the tire on my car, I would think that was an all-day job. But if you did it to somebody who does it for a living, they could do it in a few seconds, especially if they work for NASCAR. But then you also have priorities that change. I know for a fact that you probably have all run into this because something that might be a medium to high priority today becomes a fire shortly after your sprint starts or after you pull it in on the board in a Kanban board. Um, and so then all of a sudden you're juggling the work. Like, and now what do I do? Do I work on this one or that one? Because I'm halfway done with this one, but the other one became a higher priority. So there's always that kind of juggling. And then you don't have all the information, and that's not necessarily on purpose. It's not like anybody withheld the information or forgot to ask key questions, but whether it's the customer thinking they told you everything or an analyst thinking they asked all the questions and got everything, certain things are either uncovered in the process or um, something happens along the way that you realize there's more of an impact to the work, other work that you're doing that you have to think about, which you didn't realize in the beginning. So that happens pretty regularly in software development. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, that's just how it is. So that's why estimates can be misleading, because what you know the day that you make an estimate at that moment in time, everything might feel honky-dory and the good way to go and everybody's in agreement. But 30 seconds after that discussion, things can start to change. So it can definitely be misleading. Then we look at an example here. This is something that Margaux will get into in more detail in following slides, but this is a screenshot of a cycle time scatter plot. And I know on first blush, it's not obvious what this is telling you, but I wanted to share it as an example because I think it was last year I was in a webinar with Colleen Johnson from Pro Kanban, and one of my dilemmas where I was working was how do I help Scrum Masters understand that even though they think story points is working for them, it's not helping them be predictable. And they also, because you can't assume that a 1 is going to be done faster than a 20, or that a 3 is going to be done faster than a 7 or a 5 or whatever. So I asked her how I could show them in the data, and it was a very simple answer, and that is when you pull in your data to Actionable Agile, you just have to add one piece of data that is not used by default because story points are not needed in Flowmetrics. But because the company I was working with used story points for all of their work, I wanted to show them that the time in which it took to get that work done did not correlate to the points that it was given. And the problem with that is too many people, especially leaders, product owners, and sometimes even people on the team expect that because it's a 1, it'll be done faster than a 3 or a 5, but it's just not the case in many situations. So if you look at this chart, what it's telling us is that the work items have points from 0 to 8, and they have different colors. So as is pointed out in with the arrows, you can see that there's story points that are 0, 2, 3, 5, 0.5, and they're all done at different times. So if you had a story point 5.5, why did it take 54 days to get that done, but it only took 15 days to get a story point of 5 done? As you can see in the green versus the, I don't know if that's brown or maroon, but this is just an example of, you would expect to see if the story point estimated relates to when the work could be done and how much capacity the team has. You should see those numbers line up, like all the ones should be at the bottom, all the 5s in the 8s in the middle, and then the 13s and 20s higher up. But this is evidence that that's not the case. And I did it with team after team after team, and it was always the same. So let's go on to the next slide. And just as a reminder, that's using real data instead of somebody's gut feeling. So the alternative is flow metrics. And this is where the recommendation came into me, because we were battling, how to improve our delivery, but also to measure things that matter. So our mantra became, metrics that matter, because there's a lot of things you can measure, but if they don't add value in helping you get the work done, then why measure them, honestly? So the whole industry, I think, is transitioning finally from output to outcome metrics. So this really helps us improve that outcome. So when you're using real data, it shows you in the past what you've done. So it gives you an opportunity to use that in the future forecast of work that could be done. So we'll show you in the following slides how that can happen. And Margaux is going to take us through those, and then I will add where appropriate.
All right. So we just mentioned the flow metrics, but what are the flow metrics? And really it's 4 metrics. So what you see here, it's the throughput. So that's the number of items you've completed by unit of time. For example, your daily throughput, how many items were completed today, weekly, monthly. That's up to you then, how you want to measure that one. Then you have cycle time. So that's the total elapsed time it took for an item to be completed. So from start to finish. And then you have the work in progress, so how much work is currently in progress. And then you have the last one, but not least, the age of the work in progress. So how old is the work that's currently in progress today? To look at all of those, you have different tools out there, but I'm going to talk about the one I know the most, ActionableAgile Analytics, and that's the one I work for. So in ActionableAgile, you have a whole suite of charts once you've loaded your data, and then you can take a deep dive into each flow metrics one by one. So here, that's the cycle time scatter plot. So just like Carolyn showed you just before, each dot it's plotted based on when it was completed and how old it was at that point. And then it allows you to see patterns, right? Because you have the axis with the dates at the bottom. So how things evolve. If there's a trend that your cycle time is slowly increasing, is it decreasing? Is it stabilizing? Do you have a lot of outliers? So it's really about seeing what you've done in the past. And we have different percentile lines, like the yellow one here, that kind of show you, okay, if I look at 85% of all of the dots that I have here, they are at 16 or less. So basically you get a single item forecast right there, because that means that 85% of all of your work was done in 85 days or less. Is that good? Is that bad? Then that's when your context come into play, right? But right there, that's good information. It can be difficult to find. And then you can take deep dive into items that took way longer too. So cycle time, looking back at what you've done before and maybe seeing patterns of what was good and not so good. The next one, the throughput. So remember, it's the number of items completed per day. And here, sometimes you might complete many items a day, sometimes less. This should show a pretty good representation on how you do your work. Do you do weekly release? So you have basically nothing being done until everything is completed at the end. Or do you have more like a flow base where it's like you complete as they come, right? You don't wait for things to be to reach a certain day, for example. So this right there is the key to a lot of good simulation that we will show you later, because that should represent all of your work. Size doesn't matter. Here it's all about the count of items. Then, my favorite one, the age of your work in progress. It looks like a lot, but I can assure you it's pretty easy to understand. It shows you all the different pieces of work currently in progress and where in your workflow. Those are the columns and the items are the dots. And then the colors kind of shows you the risk, right? where are you right now compared to what you've done before? This way, when you follow the dark green and the lighter green, you're good, right? You're on track to do similarly to what you've done before. When you reach the yellow, that means already items are older than what you've done before. So it's maybe a signal. When you reach the red, it already means you're older than 85% of all the work you've done before. So you can use this in your dailies to figure out, okay, what should we focus on today? Items that are almost finished, the oldest items we just started working on, but are already at risk, right? It's a great chart to drive meaningful conversation and just make decisions as fast as possible. Because when you do that, and you pay attention to how old your work is, that when it's stuck, you don't just say, it's stuck. No, you discuss it. Is it a dependencies? Is because you're waiting on someone else? Is that person on vacation? Okay, what do we do then? If you just started working on it, was it even ready to be started? You can just ask a lot of questions. They said, okay, no, we move that one back to backlog. And this one, it's actually not relevant anymore. Then let's just close it. You can do the cleanup. And this way, items don't just get too old for no reason. Eventually, when you close them, you have fewer outliers, which make that your cycle time is more condensed, which in the end makes you more predictable. So I hope that
Margaux,
makes
can I add a little something here?
Yes. Of course.
So when we first brought Actionable Agile in, this is where I was working to understand the data and clean up what was still in progress, because I knew that all the other charts are completed work, so all that work was done. But this stuff we could still save, or we could still address it before it got any older. But what I found was quite surprising, and what I didn't realize this tool would do for us was really help us clean up data. We found a lot of really bad data because of inappropriate processes being followed, things are being moved to the backlog, but status wasn't being changed. And the work was lost or forgotten because they had filters on their boards in different projects that were excluding data. And this brought it all forward. And so this chart shows 26 as the max days. When I first did it for the place that I was working for previously, I believe my top number was 1,000 days. So there was some stuff sitting in the backlog for a very long time, and some of the stuff was actually in progress, but had been stuck. So they kind of forgot about it. They deprioritized it, but didn't do anything with it appropriately. So we knew going in day one, our flow metrics, the baseline was going to be really bad, but we knew that it would be super easy to make improvement. So what I started with was I looked at the farthest right and the highest up, and I looked at the oldest things first and asked, why is this still open? What happened with it? What can we do about it? How do we prevent this from going forward? And then gradually we worked towards not letting that happen again. So this was super helpful for the teams to review on a regular basis, which kind of drove their daily stand-up or their daily Scrum discussion, because they wanted to prevent things from getting old. So they wanted to know how could they make it move forward and what had to happen. So it really helped us improve processes along the way, in addition to our metrics.
And we've done that exactly like for us as well internally. I think it was about a year and a half ago, our dev team started to use this chart religiously. So in every other stand-up, instead of spending like maybe sometimes 30 minutes to chit chat or no, it's fine, and like not driving the conversation about why work was not moving through the flow, they started using this. And then a lot of things were in the red, like it was very spread out, like it was like there was been an explosion on that chart. And then they started tackling exactly like Caroline did. And eventually, now they have it into them that, okay, oh, things are going up. Oh, we need to do something about it. They don't want it to reach the red. There's always a few outliers, right? Not everything can be perfect, but the fewer you have, that's what you should strive for. And for us, data-wise, they went from about like delivering in 80 days or less to be 47 days or less, and then 42 days or less, and then it stabilized, and then we had a bit of a crisis, but then it stabilized again. So that's a process that does work, just takes a bit of time and consistency, but it does work. Because like Caroline said, the other chart I just showed you, it's done. You can't do anything about it. So if you want to change a behavior that you've been doing, it's this chart that will help you tip the balance into the right way, because it's still in progress. All right, and last but not least, the WIP. So this time it's about the number of items in progress. And that one is often overlooked, but it carries some very good information, but not the whole story by itself. And here we see the daily WIP, so how many items were in progress on any given day. And as you can see, there is a huge like up and down. And if it increases, is that good? Is that bad? We have no idea. That's all about you and your context, right? The thing is that when things happen and you don't know why, that's when you might have surprises. But let's imagine it here, the WIP increased. And that could be, okay, good. They hired more people. More people are working. That makes sense that the WIP increases. But if that's not what happened and nothing changed, but you're just taking on more and more things, that's when you can have bad effect that I'm going to jump in right after. And same here, the WIP decreases. Okay, but maybe it was, let's look at the day, maybe it was Christmas. And then it makes sense that you work on less things during Christmas. So it's not always a signal that will tell you the whole story by itself. You need to dig a bit into the context. But it's a good place to kind of look from time to time to make sure that you're not missing anything. And the reason I jump now into the flow metrics being a secret weapon is that it is because it helps you look back. What was good? What was not so good? Look at what's in progress today. Make the right decisions so that you can better support your team for the future. You know, maybe committing to less things, better managing the work in progress. However, the thing is that, like I just mentioned a bit now with the WIP, it doesn't tell the whole story. You can't just focus on one metric and make it perfect, because usually if you focus on just one, the rest might not be doing so great. So exactly, looking at just one, no bueno. So let's take the example if you have too much in progress. And that's usually when things start to become a problem. Let's imagine your context hasn't changed, right? You still have the same amount of people. It's, let's say, April, so there's nothing very specific happening time-wise. But the thing is that you start working on more and more things consistently. What's likely to happen is that if you don't increase your capacity, but you just work on more things, it's going to take you longer to do all of those things. So if it takes you longer to do work, in the end, you manage to finish less per unit of time. So if I put that back, right, into flow metrics terms, it's basically the higher your WIP. So as your WIP increases, your cycle time is likely to increase as well, and your throughput is likely to go down. So if you just focus on having the perfect WIP, good, but or just the cycle time, that doesn't tell you the whole story. And I can show you that with data that really happened to us. So right there, you see the cycle time scatter plot from a marketing team from 2022, and you can see, you know, like, oops, I have it there, and you have the information here. You know, the cycle time was pretty good. We were happy with this. 85% of their work was done in 6 days or less, so they could start and finish within a week or two. We were really happy with this. However, things changed, right? We had to prepare for an event. There was a big time crunch, and then you can see really old items showing up on the cycle time scatter plot. And basically those, they took over 100 days to be completed, which means that they were in progress at the same time as those right here. So yes, the cycle time here looked good, but if we would have looked at the age of their work in progress, there would have been a lot of red. Things might not have looked that good. And that's why we go from 85% of the time their work was done in 6 days or less to being 18 days or less. And that makes it a lot less predictable for them to say, okay, I have a story today. When am I likely to be done with it? Well, here we would have assumed, 6 days or less, perfect. And here it's 18 days or less. Already it's a lot different. So focusing on just one metric is not enough. You need the whole picture. All right, so now let's focus on something different, because we've told you, okay, you can't forecast using story points. You can't, predictions are not really useful in that way. What can you do instead? Well, you can use your real data to provide forecast. And by that, you can do probabilistic forecasting using Monte Carlo simulations. If you want now on your screen, you have the QR code that will take you to a very good blog post that goes more in details about what probabilistic forecasting is. But in short, it's a forecast that has different probabilities, right? It's not about getting one date, one number. It's about getting a range of possibilities, and then that's up to you to choose which one works best for you. Are you okay with a lot of risk? Are you not okay with risk? That's up to you right there. But how does that work specifically? So to forecast one item, you can look at your cycle time, one item, and look, at the data there. When it comes to a group of items, then you need to use a statistical model. And that's when the Monte Carlo simulations comes into play. And you have two Monte Carlo simulations that exist. At least in ActionableAgile, we have two. And that's Monte Carlo when. So you want to know when will you be done with a specific amount of item or range of item, or how many items can you accomplish by a given time, by a date, right? By your next sprint, your next quarter, your next whatever. So there's simulations out there to help you with this. And I'm going to take a deep dive now into Monte Carlo when. So now let's imagine, let's put the scenario. We have currently 50 items in our backlog. And we would like to know, okay, when can we commit that those will be done? So what you do, you come to ActionableAgile, you go to the chart, Monte Carlo when. Before you look at anything on the chart, all you have to do is go into the section on the right-hand side, you put your number of items. And then you can use the controls to make sure that you only include the data that makes sense, right? The time period that is correct, you only include the stories because I don't want to look at epics at the same time, so just stories. And then the chart will move a bit and you will see here that part at the top with all the bars will change according to the simulations. And what you see here is the range of different possibilities that will happen to accomplish 50 items. So to do those, we use your throughput, which is also at the bottom of the chart, right? With the little up and down and the dots. So it's how much work was completed per unit of time in the past, because that should show a good sample of how you do your work every day. So that will help us do the simulation. And then we simulate 10,000 time work being completed. And then we see with the dates, right? How long did it take to finish those 50 items? And when you see here that 50% was done, and that would be the 6th of September, that's European dates. 70% of the time we could be done by the 13th of September or before. 85% of the time it was on the 22nd of September or before, and so forth. So as you see, the more risk you include in your forecast, the more optimistic the forecast seems, right? 50% of the time, of my simulation says that it will be done on the 5th of September. So that's pretty good. And then 70% of the time, okay, we give a date a bit later. So you include a bit more risk, it's slightly more pessimistic, and so forth. But of course, it's a lot easier to look at this chart directly on the calendar, which you see right in the middle. And then you just go and see the colors represent your different possibilities. And that's up to you to commit to one right now to whoever's asking, your stakeholder, your manager. And the thing is that that's the forecast right now as I run it. Tomorrow, I might have a different number of items, hopefully fewer, but you never know. The scope might increase. And then all of a sudden, now you have 62. So you can put 62, do the same simulations, and then what happens? You get an updated forecast as often as you look at it. So you don't need to just commit once, and that's the date we go for, and that's it. But you get an updated forecast every time you look at it. So you can see, okay, ooh, things change for the worst. Okay, why? And that's when the flow metrics come into play. You can go back and see, okay, why is it now telling me a date way, further in the future? Our throughput went down. Why did it go down? Oh, but we started working on too many more things. And usually you can kind of trace back the whole story of what's happening. Sometimes it's out of your control, but sometimes there's stuff you can do to improve as you go. I hope that makes sense. I just said a lot of words right now. So I hope that's all good. But that's really a place where you can always be aware what's going on, right? Because things might change and it's out of your control. You can't do anything about it today. But if you can tell your manager as early as possible, like, hey, given what's happening to our team right now, 2 people went on sick leave, someone broke their leg, and, bad stuff. well, we cannot keep the date we have said, but here's the new forecast, and I'm confident right now that this is the forecast, what we can commit to. It's a lot easier to accept than arriving at the original date and say, hey, didn't work. So it's just about continual forecasting and just always being up to date of what's going on. All right. So with everything I just told you, why is probabilistic forecasting a better solution and has better advantages? First of all, if you use a tool like ActionableAgile, it's super fast. I didn't do a video, but basically by the time you've entered your number, the simulation already done. So you get an accurate forecast in seconds. So it's much faster than spending time in spreadsheets. Then it's based on your real data. It's not based on estimates. So you can't make the data lie very easily, except when it's estimates. And it's always up to date. So you can spend more time analyzing the forecast and figuring out what to do rather than generating the forecast. Because remember, forecast is only accurate the moment you run it. So 2 hours later, it's already expired. All right. We've done a lot of talking now with Caroline, but let's summarize what we've just discussed. So instead of estimating, try to shift your focus into forecasting the future, right? And you do what you can with what you know. So that's really what you can do for the best. You can use Monte Carlo simulation to see the range of outcomes and decide which one works the best for you. If you actively manage your WIP, you will have better control over what's happening and all the different outcomes. So you can have an impact on your delivery. And then you can use the flow metric to just be aware of what you've done. And, you know, if you do retros, you can always go back and see, okay, but how did we do the past month compared to the month before? So it's always valuable to look back at what you've done and compare with what's happening today. So that if you used to do something right and somehow you change now, well, you can discuss that. It's about the discussion around the data. All right. And this is basically all we had. So I hope we can soon jump into questions and explain things more in details. But we wanted to make sure to share with you some information. So if you're interested in trialing ActionableAgile, or you would just like to see, okay, flow metrics, how does that work, and play around with it, you have a QR code right there. We can go start the trial. And I'm the person who would most likely help you with training and making sure that you know how to use the tool, load data correctly, and so forth. But Caroline, she works with Sentify, and she would be there more into the whole implementation, you know, doing health check, just checking everything about how you use the metrics as well. Anything you want to add there, Caroline?
Nope, I'm looking forward to, I saw some questions pop up, so I'm looking forward to getting into those.
Perfect. Then I think we're ready to jump into the questions. And I can always go back to the previous slides if we need to highlight anything.
That's great. You might need to go back to the previous slides. First question from Rob. On the WIP run chart, is the count in stories, items, or story points? McNicoll and Bob actually gave some responses, but I'd like to hear from you.
So on the WIP run chart, so it's this one, right? Here it's just the number of tickets. So let's imagine I've loaded my data and I have some epic stories, subtasks, tasks, whatever. Can just use the control to just focus on just one. And here I know for a fact it's only stories. So it's not about story points here. On this chart by itself, you can't do anything with story points because here it's just about the number of items in progress.
And by default, story points are not part of ActionableAgile. I had to pull those in special for my experiment to show them.
On this one, the aging work in progress chart, you could do exactly like Caroline showed you before, where you load your data, you load your story point values, and here it still shows you the items, right? But you can highlight with different colors based on their story point value. So the placement won't change, but the color might give you an indicator, okay, we have a 0.5 that's way older than anything we've done before, and or 12 that's doing just fine. So yeah, you can also do that here.
Great. I hope that answered your question, Rob. Please bounce on your question if you have something to add. Yeah. Charles has a question, and we're on the right chart. we're on the aging work in progress chart, what do the different colors, and I believe he means in the columns, mean on the aging work in progress chart?
Absolutely. Sorry, I had to go quite fast on that, so I'll spend more time explaining it. So basically, we pull the person timelines from the cycle time scatter plot charts. This way, at first you can remove all the colors, right? And just focus on the lines. This way you can see the placements of the dots. How does that compare with what you've done before? The problem is that just focusing on the line and that will only help you in the last column. When you look earlier in your workflow, you have no idea if you're on track or not. So that's kind of what those colors are here to show you. They kind of show you how items exited each column in the past using those percentiles. So if I look here, 50% of my work exited testing in 7 days or less. So if I keep following the dark green, I will follow how 50% of your work exited each column in the past. So 50% of my work was usually out of here by day 1, out of here by day 3, out of here by day 5, and so forth. And then the lighter green shows you the same information, but for 70% of your work. And then you have the yellow for 85% of your work. And then you have the red that just shows you the rest. So everything that much older. And just so you know, those colors, you can change the different color schemes if you're colorblind. It's very adaptive. But it's really about seeing what's doing okay compared to what you've done before and seeing things that are probably out of line. And the goal is to use this chart so you can tackle problems before they really become a problem. So when you see, let's imagine you would have a dot right at that 17 days in your first active column in analysis active. Already, that would mean that this item is older than 95% of all the work that you've done so far. So that should be a pretty good indicator that there's something very different about that piece of work compared to what you've done before. And then that's when you can click on it, that open a nice little window that will give you more information about that piece of work. And you say, ooh, this is linked to this and this and this. And hopefully someone is assigned to it. So when you discuss this with that person, like, oh yeah, but I'm waiting on something. We didn't have that. And then you can just decide, okay, but let's move it back to backlog then. Has no place in progress if we can't do it. So it's about dispatching the work. So I hope that helps.
I love the way the chart shows progressively the actual going over the 50 or the 70 or the 85% as you move across the system. That's great. Hope that answers your question, Charles. If you need to bounce on it, please do bounce on in your questions such that we can pick it back up. Harding has another question. Regarding the WIP run chart, do you change, adjust WIPs for the workflow stages only during an initial team setup organization, or it's actually an ongoing process that happens throughout the project?
So here, for example, that's example data that we have, but that would be, let's say, for one team, I loaded one board, and that's the fluctuation you could see. So you might see something very different when you load your own data. I've seen the case where it's pretty stable with not much variation at all. So that would really depend. But here, that's nothing that you said. That's the truth. If you are in Jira, that's the number of items that were in a status category of in progress. If you're in Azure, that would mean a state that's in progress and so forth. So here, it's not about what you think is in progress and what you decide to count as in progress. Even kind of, you can refine that, but it's really about the statuses and where it was in your workflow. I hope that answers the question.
I think I want to add here too. Margaux, do you guys, is that scenario where you can do that, like they use it in the Pro Kanban training, the simulation of what it's like to pull in too much WIP and how long it really takes you to get the work done? Is that still available? Do you know?
Yes, but that's on the, let me go back. Sorry. It would be on the Monte Carlo simulation chart right here. So what you can do, for example, we have a scale throughput. So that's where you can play different what if scenarios on your data. So you can say, okay, we have 50 items right now, but what if we pull more? So you could put now, okay, with my current context, without changing anything, if we pull more things in, the date changes here, so that already you can see how that would impact your data. But you can also do that, okay, let's say that nothing changes right now, but we know that in the next few weeks, people will start going on vacation. You know, some people will go on sick leave, maternity leave, something. So your context is going to change, but you don't yet have that data to support that assumption. You can change your throughput here from 1 to, let's say, 0.8 to simulate how losing 20% of your team might affect the forecast. So you can play a bit with that, with increasing the scope, reducing the scope, the capacity, how that affects the forecast. Because remember, in the flow metrics, it's not just about one thing. You can play with different things that can have an impact on the forecast. Was that what you wanted?
And what I was referring to, I think, was the twig leanability thing that we used to have. Is that still out there?
Yes. So I think now it's with Kanban folks.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if it's a free tool anymore.
So if you take a program Kanban class, you'll get to see it. But what was cool about it is the people in the class that were skeptics about keeping WIP down, it was an opportunity for us to pretend to be a team, and the app would throw new items at you that were in the backlog, and it would tell you that, oh, this one's urgent, you've got to pull it in. So then, but you had WIP limits in each column, so you had to be able to decide, am I going to put more people on existing work to get that done, or do I pull this in and let somebody else work on it that might not be as familiar? And so we went through multiple scenarios through the exercise, and it was really cool because at the end, you were able to see by the decisions you made whether it improved or reduced your throughput. And all the skeptics were won over. They're like, okay, I want to do that again, and I want to change my answers next time. Because it's hard, it's a concept, but until you've lived it, it's kind of hard to embrace it. So that was super helpful.
Great, thank you. I hope that answers your question, Harding. And yeah, I used Twig with Daniel Vaganti on my PSK training course with Agile for Humans. Great fun, that. Moving on to the next question. If we just, this is from Nawaz. If we just use counts for flow, how do we prevent gaming? Slicing big work into small tickets artificially. That kind of gaming.
I mean, you can always cheat, but then what's the point of cheating? Because in the end, the number of items you complete, you can't lie, right? So you could, I mean, if you manage to break them down as little as possible, that you can get a lot, oh, that's great. That means you manage to get a lot of value out of the work. Hopefully you don't complete stuff that are useless, but that's pretty good. I think it's mostly about consistency, I would say. That's what really matters. But it's fine. I mean, if you can gamify it, sure, go ahead. But if you manage to break down bigger things, have conversation around it, then you've already parts of the work, right? So, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can prevent gaming, but I think it does reduce it because if the team understands their numbers and they understand where they came from and where they're headed to, like maybe they were way off and their work was taking way longer than they thought. There's a lot of things that you can do to help address those issues. And then when you are working on trying to improve those numbers as a team, you also need to hold each other accountable because you want to make sure that everybody is focused on what needs to get done and understands what your targets are. Because if you have a predictability of like, say, you can get work done in anywhere between 5 and 25 days, and you want to either keep that the same or shrink it because some jobs can be done sooner, but a lot of teams can't get stuff done in 25 days. But if that's your range and you want to maintain it or reduce it, you're going to be looking at the work and understanding the work and reviewing the work more often as a group and from a higher level. So if somebody's gaming it, it's going to affect the whole team. But because it's so transparent, I think it actually reduces that. For me, in my experience, it brought the teams more together and more focused on let's get this work done as a team versus I just want to get my piece done.
Great, thank you for that. Hope that answers your question, Nawaz. Moving on, Bob, we've got quite a few questions. Thank you everybody for all these questions. So engaging, thank you. Bob has a question. How do you handle work being broken down as it gets into the team's backlog, refined? If I look at an epic or a backlog of work unrefined and it shows X numbers of work items, but in reality that number will increase as the time right sizes each item during the refinement sessions. So as you go along in time, you get more items on a large subject. So how do you handle work being broken down as it gets into team backlog refined?
I can take that one. Margaux, you can fill in the blanks if I miss something. But two things that we did. We looked at the team overall. Usually the actionable agile metrics, the in progress to done, is typically for the work that's ready to be worked, and it's not that preliminary piece where you're looking at an epic that has a really high level description and maybe a couple of stories that are obvious. If it hasn't gone through the refinement process yet, then you can't really estimate it. It's too early in the development of that understanding of that work. But what we did with a few of our teams was we had a board specifically for the product owner and the business analyst, and we looked at the statuses that they were using for managing their work. So they kept their work in Agile, but they had different statuses so that they knew that a new epic had come in. They had to break it down into stories, and they had to prepare those stories for the teams so that they could refine them as a team and bring them in when appropriate. But they wanted to know, the BAs and the product owners wanted to know, how long is it taking us to get our work done from the time an idea is green lighted and we need to pull it in, and we know that we're usually given a deadline up front. How are we able, or how are we doing in getting that done in time, or in an appropriate amount of time? Because they always wanted to measure the flow from before it was on the team to getting it to the team. They were always trying to make sure that there was something ready for the next round when things got deployed and new work was ready. So to keep that flow going from a higher perspective point, they analyzed, are we doing a good job of keeping things flowing to get the work to the team so that we wouldn't enter into spots where, okay, there's a lot of people that are waiting for work to come in. We wanted to prevent that whenever we could. So they measured it with different statuses from that perspective for them. And then when it became an item on the board for the team to pull in, they were prioritized. And then the timing happened when they pulled them into those statuses on the board for the development teams. So that was where the in progress for them started. Does that make sense? And Margaux, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would say when you don't know, the whole thing is that you will never know everything. But what I usually recommend people to do, okay, but like look back at previous epics on the same project and you can have an idea how big they were, for example, in the end. And you can say, okay, how big this one currently is. So you have an idea, okay, there's a huge range in between, most likely. So you go with what you know today, right? Make decision based on what you know, but assuming that things will change and update as you go, right? Because what I've done and what people do, you go here, you do, okay, but when will I be done with this epic? There's roughly 40 items right now in it, but all my past one had closer to 80, but then put the range 40 to 80 instead of 50 in until X item completed. And you'll get a forecast that might, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to do that. That was my hands. So it won't be a very accurate forecast, but that will be the best educated guess that you can do right now with what you know. And then as you go, you refine the items, you will have more, you will know more precisely what it is. And that's when you can, refine and get a more accurate idea of when will things be done.
Thank you. Bob, hope that answers your question. We've got 7 questions left and only 4 minutes. Let's try and get through a few more. This one, you've been called out, Carolyn. Carolyn, how did your leadership take the change from story points to flow metrics with your previous experience? How did you get everyone on board?
I had 30 days to do it because from the time that I installed the trial of Actionable Agile, I had to prove to our leadership we were in the process of an Agile transformation. And they had a lot of metrics they were measuring that didn't matter. And I had to convince them of that first. And then I had to show them what I could understand from the work that we had currently in progress, from the project level, the board level, cross projects. And so I was learning Actionable Agile at the same time. But as I showed them what I understood about the work that I couldn't get before, they were sold and approved us being able to buy the product. So I did have to convince them that story points, for one, are not for them. It's for the teams. But better yet, this tool is better than story points, so the teams can stop relying on those. Because previously they were measuring how many epics were closed, how many stories were closed, how many they wanted team velocity every month, and they compared the teams, and I'm like, no, you're going about it all wrong. So, but I had to show them something better. So that allowed me to replace all that.
I hope that answers your question, Birdie. One more for now, and then we'll have a quick check. From Doc, what assumptions are you making the backlog health? I assume that means what assumptions are you making with the backlog health?
Yes, that's correct. Apologies for the mistake.
Margaux, do you want to take that one, or do you want me to?
Can you ask the question again? I just want to make sure I understand it correctly.
What assumptions are you making with the backlog health?
In my experience, we aren't making any assumptions because you can exclude the backlog if you don't want to look at it, or you can include it. The one of the things I love about this tool is that you can define, do I want to look at backlog in my metrics, or do I want to look at just the to-do or in progress starting point? Like, what is it that I care about? And then how far in the process do I want to go? And I can decide that based on how I set up the tool, and you can see the controls on the right side of her screen. It allows you to change the controls for all charts or for each chart individually. So then you're looking at what you want to look at.
Okay. Thank you for that question. Doc, hope that answers your question. We're coming up to a close, and I'd like to, before we close, ask if Margaux and Carolyn would like to stay for more questions or not.
I can.
I see if I can. Hold on a second. Yeah, I can stay for a few more minutes.
Few more minutes. Okay, maybe one or two more questions. Okay, let's go. Tom asked a question. When does the clock start on WIP? When it's added to the backlog or when it moves to in progress?
That's for you to define. So sorry, I'm just going to go back. I don't think I took a good screenshot that shows the controls, sadly. But okay, sorry about this, guys. Close your eyes if you're sensitive. There. So basically here it's a bad example because that's bad example data. But here in the workflow stages, you would see all your different workflow stages, right? That you have in the data set you have loaded. So you would have your backlog, if that's called backlog, and then all your in progress, and then you would have what represent the end. And then it's for you to define what in progress means to you. So you select everything that's in progress plus the one that shows the end. So it's in progress when it enters the first check workflow stage, that would be in blue, because you signify what's in progress. This way you can see, because you might have a very long workflow, but you only want to focus on a small portion. So you can do that too. It doesn't have to be from start to finish. Traditionally, it could be at any
there's
point.
A lot of times when we, especially when we were working on process improvement, we were looking at how long does the development work take and the pull requests and all that. And then how long does testing take? Like, where's our backlog or our back blockers? Like, where are we running into too much work and not enough people? And so we could look at the flow from all of it, or we could break it down to just the specific statuses and parts of the work that we were worried about. And that helped us clean things up as well. And it wasn't just cleaning up data, it really enabled us to rethink our processes and rethink our flow. And earlier in the presentation, Margaux had a QR code on there for a blog post on predictability. There's other really good blog posts written by Julia and others and Daniel Vicante on their website. But understanding what statuses are beneficial and which ones are not, and then making sure that you are using the ones that most benefit your team, also helped us. So we redid our workflows after we realized we weren't working as best as we could.
And you might have multiple endpoints as well when work is completed, because in our dev team, for example, ActionableAgile exists in multiple versions, different platform. That means we fix a bug on one place. The dev work, oh my God, I'm going to manage, is over when it goes to dev done, right? The thing is that by the time it goes to done, it has to be pushed to all the different production environment, and that can take a lot of time. So we sometimes measure the cycle time until if they've done, that's the dev part, and then until it's done, when it's done. So that's also, you can define what start and finish mean for you for cycle time, for aging, for anything. So it's that flexibility that's pretty useful for teams.
Thank you, Margaux. Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you, our audience, and being so engaged. We have overrun by a couple of minutes, so to respect Carolyn's time and Margaux's time, we're going to call it an end. I have 5 more questions from the chat that I've extracted. Could I share those questions with you and have you add a written response? I'll put them on the meetup. Okay, on the meetup as a comment. If you can actually go over them and give a response, and people can actually go and engage on those responses. Is that okay for both of you?
Sounds perfect.
Fantastic. Okay, so once again, thank you everybody for coming. You are what is important to us. Thank you for attending the meetup. We hope you found this session insightful and valuable, and please stay informed about our upcoming events. Consider looking at our YouTube channel and go to our meetup and look for new sessions. And don't forget, you can actually download a meetup application on your telephone and join our community, meetup group, and the YouTube channel. That's it. Thank you very much. Thank you, Margaux. Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you, Joe. Thank you for being an excellent tech host and all the backups, Jamie and another Joe. Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Have a great day. Good night.
Have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.